History has many examples of various genocides, which is simply defined as the intentional elimination and eradication of a racial, ethnic, or other group by an oppressor. Some nations have come to terms with their past regarding genocide, whether that was a direct government policy or implemented by individuals, such as the United States with the Native Americans, and Hungary, Romania, Germany, and Austria with the Holocaust. However, Turkey was also a major contributor to these dark pages of history, and they have never come to terms, let alone admitted, that they were either actively or even passively assisting in murdering collective groups, such as Jews, Christians, and especially Armenians. What was the reason for the Armenian genocide? How long did it last? What was the result? Just before World War II and prior to the beginning of the Holocaust, Adolf Hitler made a comment about the Jews they were targeting. Who will care about the Jews? Who remembers the Armenians? According to historian Margaret Lavinia Anderson, the Armenian genocide reached an iconic status as the apex of horrors conceivable before World War I. It was described by contemporaries as the murder of a nation, the race extermination, the greatest crime of the ages, and the blackest page in modern history. Also, according to historian Stefan Ehrig in Germany, the Nazis considered the Turkey a post-genocidal paradise and incorporated the Armenian genocide, its lessons, tactics, and benefits into their own worldview. The Armenian people have resided in the Caucasus regions of Eurasia and Anatolia for around 3,000 years. They had a solid society and a functioning state government since the 6th century BC, which is 1,500 years before the arrival of the Seljuk Turks. For some of that time, the Kingdom of Armenia was an independent entity. In the 4th century AD, Armenia became the first nation to make Christianity its official religion, establishing the Armenian Apostolic Church even before the Roman Empire or Byzantines. The conquest of the Byzantine Empire in 1453 by the Ottoman Empire and subsequently the Persian Safavid Empire pressed claims over Armenian territory. The Ottoman Empire grew exponentially, and within its borders was a multi-ethnic, multilingual, and multi-religious collective. and this established a millet system offered non-Muslims within the empire a safe place within society. The millet system was used to give minority religious communities within the empire limited power to regulate their own affairs, but under Ottoman administration. While Sharia law was imposed, the Turks still guaranteed non-Muslim property rights and freedom of worship to non-Muslims, for which they paid a special tax, but future events would put pressure on the Ottomans. Russia's victory over the Ottomans in the 1877-1878 war saw the empire lose parts of eastern Anatolia, the Balkans, and Cyprus. Following the 1878 conclusion of the Congress of Berlin, the Ottomans agreed to equal and more lenient treatment of Armenian Christians. However, there was no European oversight, so the Turks continued to oppress Armenians and other non-Muslim groups. Turkish Sultan Abdülhamid II was infuriated by the nascent Armenian demands to have basic equal legal and civil rights. Hamid II stated that he would solve the Armenian question once and for all. Sound familiar? In 1891, Abdülhamid created the Hamidi Kurdish regiments to handle the Armenians. From 1895 to 1896, there were widespread massacres, with about 100,000 Armenians being murdered. Many of these acts were done by Ottoman soldiers and roving bands encouraged by the government. Many Armenian villages were destroyed or forcibly converted to Islam, forcing many Armenians to immigrate, and again, in 1909, 25,000 people, mostly Armenians and nearly all the Christians and some Jews, were killed in Adana and other small towns and villages. The Young Turks, the educated reformers, overthrew Sultan Abdülhamid II in 1909 and established a more modern, westernized constitutional government. This gave the Armenians hope that they would finally be treated fairly and have an equality under the new government. Yet misfortune was to befall the Armenians, Jews, and Orthodox Christians. The new Young Turks and their government wanted to Turkify or cleanse the country, the empire of non-Muslim Turks, who were considered a grave threat to the hegemony and security of the new government. Things were about to get worse. Before World War I, Turkey had a population of 15 to 17.5 million people, of which 2 million were Armenian. And according to the Armenian Patriarchate's estimates for 1913 to 14, there were 2,925 Armenian towns and villages in the Ottoman Empire, of which 2,084 were in the Armenian highlands in the vilayets of Bitlis, Diyarbakir, Erzurum, Harput, and Van. Armenian civil service lost their jobs in late 1914 and early 1915 when Turkey entered the war with the Central Powers, and Armenians were targeted for conscription in late 1914, along with Greeks and Kurds, and 10% of all Armenians, all able-bodied men, went to war. This conscription, ordered by Bahedin Shakir of the Committee of Union and Progress, or the CPU, had another motive. Removing the fighting-age men would resist the murders and deportations of November 1914. The provincial governors of Van, Bitlis, and Erzurum sent many telegrams to the central government pressing for more severe measures against the Armenians without opposition. In 1915, the first large-scale massacres of Armenians and Assyrian Christians started during the Ottoman invasion of Russia and Persian territory, as in February 1915, when the government disarmed Armenian soldiers and transferred them to labor battalions, where all but the most skilled workers were efficiently and systematically executed. But even these survivors would also be eliminated the following year. The international media were slowly becoming aware of the massacres of the Armenians, primarily the men. Armenian leaders tried to keep the situation under control and maintain calm, being concerned that even self-defense could make matters worse. The government tried to prevent journalists and photographers from documenting the atrocities, threatening them with arrest. Despite government intervention, substantiated reports of mass killings were widely covered in Western newspapers. On May 24, 1915, the Triple Entente nations of Russia, Britain, and France formally condemned the Ottoman Empire for crimes against humanity and civilization. They also threatened to hold those committing the acts accountable after the war. Witness testimony was published in books such as The Treatment of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, published in 1916, and Ambassador Morgenthal's story in 1918, which brought worldwide public awareness about the genocide. Cevdet Bey, the Turkish governor of Van district, ordered the Armenians to hand over all their weapons on April 18, 1915. The Armenians knew that if they did, they would likely be killed more easily, and if they refused, it would justify the army conducting massacres. The Armenians chose not to relinquish their weapons and fortified themselves in the city. They managed to repel the Ottoman attack that began on April 20th. During the siege, Armenians in the less well-defended surrounding villages were massacred. When Russian forces captured Van on May 18th, they found 55,000 corpses in the area, men, women, and children. Cevdet's forces then proceeded to attack the Assyrian villages at Bitlis. The men were killed, and the women and children were kidnapped by the hired Kurds, with survivors marched away from the villages and executed. By the end of June 1915, only a dozen Armenians remained who later came out of hiding. Cemal Pasha, the commander of the Fourth Army, planned the first deportations of the Armenians in February 1915, targeting Alexandria, Giorgio, Adana, Hajin, Zeytun, and Sis, where Armenians had been relocated to the area around the Konya province in central Turkey. The government Central Committee decided to implement a removal policy in April, and during the night of April 23rd to 24th, 1915, hundreds of Armenians, mostly political activists, intellectuals, and community leaders, were rounded up in Constantinople and across the empire. Armenians who had previously been relocated from Cilicia in central Turkey were sent to the Syrian desert and left to die. Turkish soldiers raped the women and forced many of them into serve as sex slaves. Muslim families moved into the homes and seized the property and lands of the murdered and deported Armenians. It is estimated that at least 150,000 Armenians passed through Erzincan starting in June 1915, passing through various camps that were hastily established to manage the large numbers of Armenians being driven to the killing site at the nearby Kumar Gorge. Upon arrival, thousands of Armenians were pushed off the cliffs into Lake Hazar. During this time, at least 500,000 Armenians passed through the Finikir Plain south of Malatia, one of the deadliest areas during the genocide. The arriving convoys of vehicles carrying new loads of victims to the Kata highlands passed by the deep gorges, already filled with tens of thousands of dead from the previous convoys. Other mass murders took place along the tributaries and banks of the Tigris, Euphrates, or Murat rivers, and many Armenian men were drowned after being tied together, back to back, often weighted down and thrown into the water. In addition, to make the collection and transportation and executions easier, many concentration camps were set up in Syria and Upper Mesopotamia, where by October 15th, around 870,000 people had been deposited. The number would grow through 1916. In 1916, another wave of massacres occurred, leaving only 200,000 Armenians alive by the end of the year, with between 100,000 to 200,000 Armenian women and children forcibly converted to Islam. Massacres and ethnic cleansing of Armenian survivors continued through the Turkish War of Independence after World War I, carried out by Turkish nationalists. Again, other Christians, Jews, and even Greeks were also included. The best estimates by the 1.2 million Armenians were killed after being dropped into the Syrian desert having been denied food, water, the women subjected to rape, but there were survivors. Many of these people were repeatedly transferred between various camps for a few weeks, until only a few survivors remained, most due to disease and starvation. The fear of disease frightened the general staff, and they ordered some camps to be shut down in late 1915 due to the tangible fear of diseases infecting the military. Following the armistice, the Allied governments wanted those responsible for the Armenian genocide prosecuted. Grand Vizier Damat Ferid Pasha publicly recognized that 800,000 Ottoman citizens of Armenian origin had died as a result of state policy, and he stated that humanity, civilizations are shuddering and forever will shudder in the face of this tragedy. This is the closest to admitting guilt that any Turkish leader has ever provided, and it was over a century ago. After the war, and at the start of the Turkish War of Independence in 1919, the killings tapered off, and by the end of the internal conflict in 1923, when the genocide finally ended, foreign observers estimated that there were between 600,000 and 1.5 million Armenians dead. When the genocide was over, there were just 388,000 Armenians remaining in the Ottoman Empire. Decades later, that number of those murdered, to include all parties, Armenians, Christian, Greeks, and Jews, was revised to just over 2.2 million, to include those who died in labor camps. In order to appear to have something resembling an appeasement policy, the post-war Ottoman government held the Ottoman Special Military Tribunal. This was a kangaroo court created to deflect blame and pin the Armenian genocide onto the CUP leadership in order to exonerate the entire Ottoman Empire. The hope was that this trial would avoid the partition of Turkey by the Allies, as had happened to the former Ottoman holdings that became Palestine, Transjordan, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. Determined that the genocide was organized and carried out by the top leaders of CUP. 18 of those officials held responsible, such as Talat, Enver Pasha, and Yamal, were sentenced to death and then tried in absentia as they had fled abroad. But they were hunted down as part of Operation Nemesis, the Armenian plan to locate and assassinate the surviving chief perpetrators of the Armenian genocide. Mehbud Khan Javanshir, the Minister of Internal Affairs of Azerbaijan, was assassinated by Misak Turlakian in Constantinople on July 18, 1921. Grand Vizier Said Halim Pasha was also assassinated by Archivir Shirakian in Rome, Italy, on December 5, 1921. Minister of the Interior and Grand Vizier Talat Pasha was assassinated in Berlin in 1921 by Armenian activist Sorgoman Taliran, who was arrested and placed on trial, but he was acquitted by a German jury. Ismail Enver Pasha died in battle on August 4, 1922 in the Bukharan People's Soviet Republic. Kamal Azmi and Vahadim Shakir, a founding member of the Committee of Union and Progress, the CPU, were both killed by Archivir Shirakian and Aram Yurganian, respectively, on April 17, 1922 in Berlin, Germany. Ahmed Jamal assassinated in Tbilisi, Georgia, on July 21, 1922 by Armenian Revolutionary Federation members Stepan Jagizhin and Artashes Gevorgian and Petros Cherpogosyan. In 1920, the Treaty of Sèvres concluded awarding Armenia its own territory in eastern Anatolia, removing Ottoman government's purpose for holding the trials. There was then, and still is, a widespread belief among the Turkish Muslims that the actions against the Armenians were not punishable crimes, but considered necessary and justified as security for the empire.
Let me stress that the Turkish people firmly believe that what happened to the Armenians was not genocide.
For 9 decades, they've denied this ever happened. It's such an anachronism, it's shocking.
We have no reluctance to recognize genocide in Darfur. We have no reluctance to talk about the Cambodian genocide or the Rwanda genocide or the Holocaust. Why is it only this genocide?
It is incredible that Orphan Kama now faces 3 years in prison for what? For daring to even say that this should be discussed in Turkey today.
They are in denial. They covering their tracks. They mocked the dead.
It's the last major taboo in Turkish politics. The authorities are afraid their own people will find out what happened.
society, our culture, we do not commit genocide. We will never accept an accusation like that.
But for those who can marvel, there was a genocide that did take place against the Armenian people.
Overseas tonight, a critical American ally is up in arms, quite literally, about something that happened yesterday on Capitol Hill.
I see the hypocrisy in not recognizing the Armenian genocide simply because there is, quote unquote, an ally who doesn't want us to do so.
Now, the White House is warning that Turkey's reaction to what happened in Congress could further destabilize Iraq.
Journalist Hrant Dink, one of the most prominent voices of Turkey's Armenian community, was killed by a gunman at the entrance to his newspaper's offices.
On January the 19th, 2007, Hrant Dink, a Turkish Armenian journalist, was gunned down in broad daylight on the streets of Istanbul. His killer was 17-year-old Turk. The reason? According to the gunman, Hrant Dink had insulted the honor of the Turkish people. To this day, no sentence has ever been passed.
In the past few years, cracks have begun to appear in the wall of silence. Pandora's box had been opened in Turkey. Hrant Dink stood up and said, yes, this was genocide. over 95 years, Turkey has denied that any genocide ever took place. Even today, just to mention it is an offence, for which Dink and many others have been prosecuted many times. But all he wanted was for the Turkish people to face up to their past, to the genocide of over 1 million Armenians, yet a crime which most ordinary Turks know little about.
He would say, don't think that they know and they're denying the facts. They're denying something they don't know. So it was about telling what happened. He would say, I don't just want those responsible to say that they admitted, but I want the entire population to know that who did it. And I want to know that it will not happen again.
Although since Dink's murder, more and more people are starting to question it, the official version of Turkish history is simple. There was no genocide. Even today, it is widely accepted as the truth. Hrant Dink had been fighting a century of official denial.
When you say genocide, that's the greatest accusation you could make against a nation. We, the Turkish people, will never accept this. From our point of view, our past is as clean as can be. No one should think we are capable of something like that.
An opinion shared by many Turks throughout Europe. Although in recent years, many European parliaments, such as France, Switzerland and Sweden, have acknowledged the genocide against Armenians, many Turks feel personally insulted by this. As in Germany, they demonstrate against any attempt to recognize the atrocities for what they were, declaring the subject taboo. But the voices of those who demand Turkey face up to its past can no longer be ignored.
This process is certainly going to affect Turkey. Turkey will have to radically change its version of history. I want them to know. I want this to be discussed on every Turkish TV channel, in every newspaper, everywhere. Then Turkey will eventually have to admit, yes, it was genocide after all. We acknowledge that fact.
But for now, the Turkish government is unyielding. The key trading partner and the country that provides a bridge to the Middle East, it is too strategically important to risk upsetting. And forcing them to acknowledge an event that happened a century ago is not a priority for the leaders of Western nations. Turkey is a key NATO ally.
Although when the situation is about an alliance as important as NATO, which we claim is an alliance based on shared values, then we cannot keep silent about the truth. Too little is being done. Too little is being said plainly. People keep quiet about what they know to be true, because basically there is no one in Western Europe who doesn't know that it was a genocide.
As Turkey has come under pressure to recognize the genocide, its leaders have used their country's strategic importance to deflect all discussions, threatening to break off diplomatic relations and to cancel arms contracts. Each time the West caves in, and meantime all the Armenian victims and their descendants can do is wait in vain for official acknowledgement of the truth.
You tell your story, and you're told not only by the Turkish government or by Turkish citizens, but also by the American government and other Western governments, that what you lived through didn't really happen quite that way. Imagine what that would feel like. You survive and you live with those memories. You tell your truth, a truth you were told you would never get to tell, and then you were told that your truth is inadequate or is subjective or is, overly emotional and is inaccurate. I think it's devastating.
Each year, on the 24th of April, hundreds of thousands of Armenians from all over the world make a pilgrimage to Yerevan, the capital of Armenia.
mourn the victims at a monument standing not far from the country where their ancestors were citizens and the mass murder took place. Turkey. For it was there on the 24th of April 1915 that the annihilation of their people began. Armenians, the world's oldest Christians, call this genocide Ahed, literally the catastrophe. It is time for people to finally accept the truth, and they have to stand up and do something about it to make sure that Turkey accepts it too. It's a sad feeling. It feels as if someone in your own family died. All those memories, the photos you see of people hung, the women, the children. The genocide must finally be acknowledged. After the fight, I said, I dedicate this fight to those who died that day. That day was the 24th of April, and I dedicated my fight to them. For the 3 million Armenians in the tiny Republic of Armenia, along with the 5 million scattered all over the world, the grief on this day is mixed with pain and anger. They cannot understand why even today Turkey will not acknowledge what happened back then. They feel betrayed and abandoned by a world that still accepts the Turkish version of history.
People talk about slaughtered Christians, slaughtered Armenians. On what basis are they making these ugly claims? To accuse Turkey without proof that such a massacre took place in 1915, to make such ugly claims against Turkey is absolutely unacceptable. No matter how often it is claimed, we will never accept it, because it never happened. But let them come and present their evidence. Then we will deal with our history if necessary.
Today, almost every government recognizes that this was indeed a genocide, despite the Turks denying that it ever happened. Armenians who were capable of escaping scattered all over the world, and almost every nation has some Armenian descendants of the tragedy. In March 2010, a U.S. congressional panel voted to recognize the genocide. To his credit, U.S. President Joseph Biden issued a declaration in 2021 that the Ottoman Empire's slaughter of Armenian civilians was genocide. In 2023, 34 nations declared this as a genocide. However, the Turkish government claims that the event never happened, claiming that the deportations were needed for its national security, and is therefore not a genocide. That is quite ironic, even when Adolf Hitler was impressed enough to follow much of what the Turks did to manage their undesirable problems. Ironically, Turkey's current record on human rights is less than stellar, especially under the mentally disturbed tyrant in question, the pro-terrorist Muslim Brotherhood supporter and anti-democratic President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And they wonder why the European Union will not let them become a member. On April 25, 2023, a monument was unveiled in Yerevan dedicated to the Armenians who participated in Operation Nemesis. Turkey and Azerbaijan immediately condemned it, and on May 3, 2023, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu announced that Turkey had closed its airspace to Armenian airlines in response to the memorial. In the spirit of appeasement, the phrase Armenian genocide did not even appear in the American press until the New York Times printed it in 2004. Yes, the same newspaper that knew and covered up the Holocaust of the Jews during World War II.